We have committee members Ken Francis here this evening, Jim LeMay, Doug Steele. We have Trent Weatherspoon sitting in for Alina Young, and as I understand, Ms. Betty Nippy-Albright will be joining us as well shortly here. All right, we are here this evening to consider the estimates for the Ministry of Agriculture, followed by consideration of Bill number 73, the Animal Production Act. And we will now begin with vote number 1, Agricultural, Central Management and Services, subvote AG01. Minister Merritt is here with his officials, and I would ask that the officials please state their names before speaking at the mics tonight and their position. And you don't have to touch the buttons and the mics. Hansard folks back here will turn it on each time you want to speak. So, Minister, you can begin by introducing your officials that are here with you and any of your opening remarks.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. Pleased to be here today to discuss the 2022-2023 Ministry of Agriculture estimates. The officials joining me here today include Grant McClellan, my Chief of Staff, and from the Ministry we have to my left Rick Burton, the Deputy Minister, Paul Johnson, Assistant Deputy Minister of Policy, Lee Otten, Assistant Deputy Minister of Programs, Penny McCall, Assistant Deputy Minister of Regulatory and Innovation, Grant Zelenko, Executive Director of Lands, and Rob Petland, the Executive Director of Corporate Services. With us also from the Saskatchewan Crop Insurance Corporation, we have Jeff Morrow, President and CEO, Brad Schultz, Vice President of Finance, Warren Ames, Executive Director of Agri-Stability. Despite our share of challenges, Saskatchewan's producers continue to produce the high-quality, safe food that helps to feed the world. The agriculture industry remains an important driver of our provincial economy. The incredible growth we continue to see in our value-added industry is one example, with 5 companies over the past year outlining plans to develop or expand canola crush capacity in the province. We also continue to see strong demand for high-quality agri-food products we produce. In 2021, we had another record year of agri-food exports with $17.5 billion in sales. Agri-food exports represented nearly half of Saskatchewan's exports in 2021. Several of the economic goals outlined in our government's 2030 growth plan are directly tied to agriculture. These include growing Saskatchewan's agri-food exports to 20 billion, increasing crop insurance to 45 million metric tons, and increasing livestock cash receipts to $3 billion. Expanding irrigation in Saskatchewan, increasing agriculture value-added revenue to $10 billion, crushing 75% of the canola we produce here in Saskatchewan, and processing 50% of the pulse crops we produce in Saskatchewan, and doubling the meat processing and animal feed value-added revenue to more than $1 billion. Indigenous communities play an important role in meeting the agriculture targets in Saskatchewan's growth plan. To help explore these opportunities, the Ministry is building and strengthening Indigenous supports, or bases. Team is working to build relationships with First Nation and Métis people across the province. This team of regional specialists, in collaboration with the Ministry's Senior Indigenous Advisor, is striving to increase awareness of the services the Ministry offers and help communities better access available programs. The growth plan goals are ambitious, and we are on track to achieving them. This year's agriculture budget supports our work in this direction. Through the Ministry of Agriculture and Saskatchewan Crop Insurance, our government is focused on supporting a successful and sustainable agriculture industry. The past year's drought presented significant challenges for our industry, and we work closely with industry groups to respond through several avenues. We've made about $277 million in payments to support the livestock sector through the Federal Provincial Drought Response Initiative. We changed Agri-Stability to eliminate the reference margin limit, and the removal is forecast to pay more than $12.5 million in additional benefits for the most recent program year. This change will provide support moving forward as well. The Saskatchewan Crop Insurance Corporation doubled the low yield appraisal threshold the values for customers who salvage cereal or pulse crops as feed source for the livestock sector, without negatively impacting future individual coverage. We temporarily increased the maximum funding a livestock producer can receive from the Farm and Ranch Water Infrastructure Program to $150,000. This included increasing the government portion of the cost share to 70% for costs above the $50,000. I would note that we have invested almost $23 million into water development projects since 2018 under the Canadian Agriculture Partnership, and over $7.5 million in 2021-2022 alone. Last year, the Forage Insurance Program, administered by Saskatchewan Crop Insurance, paid out more than $66 million, nearly half of the total liability in those programs. For these programs, producers receive between $7 and $10 in payments for every dollar in premium in 2021. These forage programs have responded to the dry conditions experienced and have paid out more than they have taken in premium 7 out of the last 10 years. These programs help livestock and crop producers through extremely dry conditions, and they protected our economy from further harm. Drought, in fact, remains a concern across the industry as we head into spring, and we recognize producers still face some challenging decisions. We continue to stay in regular contact with industry stakeholders to better understand the challenges the sector is facing as we move through the spring. Business risk management programming, and crop insurance in particular, will be extremely important for the sector in the year ahead. There also continues to be widespread interest across the ag sector in water development programming. This budget will help supply the tools industry needs to move through these current challenges while positioning producers for long-term success. Our government's commitment to agriculture is steadfast, and I am pleased to say we are delivering a significant agriculture budget again this year. This year's agriculture budget is $462.4 million, an increase of nearly 20% from the previous year. This is driven largely in part by a strong 2022-2023 crop insurance program. Business risk management spending makes up close to 3/4 of the ministry's budget and is governed by federal-provincial agreements. Specifically, we are budgeting $338.5 million to fully fund business risk management programs, which includes crop insurance, Agri-Stability, Agri-Invest, and the Livestock Price Insurance Program. These are all cost shared between the federal and provincial governments through the Canadian Agriculture Partnership. The crop insurance budget for 2022 is more than $250 million. Average coverage will reach a record level of $405 per acre this year due to higher commodity prices and increased yield coverage. This represents a 48% increase in coverage compared to last year. Due to this increase in coverage, the average total premium is higher at $12.05 per acre compared to $8.59 per acre in 2021. Our government understands that crop insurance is a major part of a farmer's risk protection. We have focused on making continual improvements to ensure it remains relevant and effective for the producers. Changes introduced to the crop insurance program this year continue to build on previous program enhancements. In response to the extreme heat and dry growing conditions we have experienced, a heat adjustment factor was added to rainfall data used in claim calculations for the forage and corn rainfall insurance programs. This adjustment helped recognize the impact of extreme heat on forage and corn yields. Additionally, within the crop insurance program, producers can choose from a variety of insurance price options. With the contract price option, producers can use their contract prices to blend with the crop insurance base price for higher coverage. This allows producers to establish an insured price reflective of the actual market value they would receive for their production. This option was only available for select crops. New for 2022, this option is now available for all commercial crops. April 14th is the extended deadline to apply or reinstate, cancel, or make any changes to the crop insurance contracts. The budget will also continue to invest $71.2 million into strategic programs under the Canadian Agriculture Partnership Agreement in 6 priority areas: science, research and innovation, public trust, markets and trade, risk management and assurance systems, value-added agriculture and agri-food processing, and environmental sustainability and climate change. The biggest percentage is going to agriculture research and tech transfers. The largest research program is the ADF, or the Agriculture Development Fund. Environmental and climate change programs include the Farm and Ranch Water Infrastructure Program, the Farm Stewardship Program, and Irrigation Programming. The risk management area includes our programs for crops and livestock disease surveillance and our pest control programs, which are administered by SARM. Value-added programs include our Saskatchewan Lean program, or improvement in manufacturing, or SLIM program. Public trust includes farm safety programming, the Ag Awareness Initiative program, and youth development and leadership programming. Trade and market development funding is used to support industry in trade and government-related activities that support market access, market development, and trade advocacy. We continue to see strong uptake in CAP programs. Work is also underway on the development of the next federal-provincial framework that will replace CAP next year. This year's budget includes an additional $2.5 million for irrigation programming, building on the $2.5 million included in last year's budget. The provincial funding enhances the support available through the Irrigation Development Program offered under the Canadian Agriculture Partnership. The program increases irrigation capacity by helping finance the infrastructure needed to bring a secure water supply to the edge of the cropland. Over the last 2 years, we have seen approximately 20,000 acres of irrigation expansion occur throughout the province. We anticipate continued interest in irrigation expansion over the coming years. The budget also includes $2 million in additional funding for the Global Institute for Food Security. This funding will be used to help define and communicate the agriculture sector's sustainable production methods and contributions to improve environmental outcomes. Additionally, we are doubling our funding to the Animal Protection Services of Saskatchewan. We are providing $1.6 million to help ensure consistent and affordable enforcement of Saskatchewan's Animal Protection Act. APSS will begin providing enforcement in the City of Saskatoon this year, following a decision by Saskatoon SPCA to cease enforcement activities. We will continue to work with all parties on a smooth transition of the animal welfare enforcement duties in Saskatoon. With this budget, we are also once again providing support through industry grants. We are pleased to be able to assist organizations and events that help drive the current and future success of our industry, including Forage Saskatchewan, Agriculture in the Classroom, the Canadian Western Agribition, the Ag Health and Safety Network, and Crop Production Show, among others. The value and importance of a strong agriculture industry is all the more relevant in turbulent times, like we've experienced during COVID. At the Ministry and Saskatchewan Crop Insurance Corporation, we remain committed to creating the right climate for success. We are working collaboratively with producers and agribusiness to achieve our shared goal of a thriving and sustainable agriculture industry in the province of Saskatchewan. With this budget, we continue to make the strategic investments to support this work. Thank you, Madam Chair, and I look forward to the questions.
Thank you, Minister. I'll now open the floor to questions from committee members, and I'll recognize Ms. Nippy Albright.
Miigwech, thank you so much for this opportunity to be here and to ask some questions. Before I ask any questions, I want to table a few documents that I'll be referencing, if that's, what is the process?
They will be posted online if they're part of the official record. Either that or you can just use them for reference by giving everyone a copy.
I've been granted permission to enter into, have them presented in the Hansard, I guess, because they will show up in Hansard. Yep.
The names.
Yes, their names, and I'm going to share their names.
Okay.
Okay, would you?
You're okay with all that stuff being posted on?
Yeah.
Yeah. I've been granted permission from the nations.
If you want to.
Okay.
Table them.
So I will
If the
table,
names are in there and you're okay
Yeah.
with the names being posted publicly, because they will be posted.
so the documents themselves,
You'll have to, did you want to table the document or just,
the documents, because I'll be referencing them.
okay, so you'll have to read their,
Goes.
yeah.
This is theirs. So these letters, please, yeah?
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay, so, I'm going to
We'll have to-
rattle off their names.
Actually, we'll have our own committee names for them, but you
Yes.
can read into
Okay.
what they are, but can we photocopy
With the
them?
app-
No, these are yours.
Oh,
Yeah, I have my own copies.
okay, we'll
Yeah.
have to photocopy them.
but they
for
have
the
to go
committee
to
record.
each of the members so they know what you're referencing.
Oh, sure. Okay.
And then we'll have to take them and she'll have to table them as part of the committee.
Oh, my goodness. If I'd known this, I would have gave you all copies. So do you want them now?
Yes, please.
Yeah, we
Okay,
have to.
so hopefully I could remember all of them off my,
Well, we can bring them back to you.
okay, then
We'll need to photo.
then you might as well go with your questions.
Do you want to sort of read in what you're providing?
You can
and
do
then go
this
in?
first and
Oh,
we can
yes.
table them
yes.
later.
Oh, perfect,
Does that
okay.
work?
That's fantastic.
We'll do that.
Okay, so I'm going to the first document, and this is all in relation to duty to consult, and in terms of the agriculture. So the first one would be from the Mount, what are they called? From the Touchwood Hills people, Our Land, interviews with elders, and they've asked that the hunting exemptions for the post-grazing period, which is October, do not cover the traditional period when molting ducks were taken in July and August. And regardless of the outcome of this auction, that there was a proposed auction to auction off that lease for the Mount Hope and pasture. So they said it would be a conciliatory gesture to write into the lease permission for First Nations to undertake traditional use of waterfowl during the months of July, August, as they were formerly accustomed until they were told not to return by leaseholders in the 1970s. So this is a document that I will be tabling. This is concerns from Touchwood, the First Nations from George Gordon First Nation, as well as Kawakatus, around the sale of Crown lands, the lease of Crown lands, agricultural lands, that they were the concerns that they had were around the stringent criteria in terms of being bidding for those that lease. So this is tabled. Another document that's going to be tabled.
All right, do you have a question in regards
Yes,
to
yeah,
that
I
one
will.
specific document before we go through every last one of them, or?
They're all together.
They're all together.
So
Okay.
there's going to be one question.
Okay.
For all of them.
Okay,
So the other document is from Dave Rondeau. He's the consultation coordinator with Crutwell Métis Local 66. And this is another document that will be tabled. And this is regarding, again, consultation regarding the windfall lumber operating plan near Sled Lake. So they have questions and want their concerns brought forward in terms of that their consultation is ongoing, and it is necessary for their traditional users to voice their concerns and exercise their Section 35 rights to consultation. So that's another document that will. Another one that was from November 2nd is the from Kakawishtahow First Nation, and they've and this is a cease and desist letter. I take it is it's regarding the unauthorized and illegal colonial sale of Kakawishtahow First Nation treaty lands. So this will also be presented for. This document will be tabled. Another document that is going to be tabled here is the, and it's from Carry the Kettle Nakota Nation, and it's with the Ministry of Agriculture and the Attorney General of Saskatchewan. And this is a judicial review application that they have sent that is now in the courts, but just wanted to table that document. And the last document that I would like to table is a letter from the Onion Lake First Nation regarding the meetings they've had with the ministry regarding consultation. And they have a question, and I will be raising this question here. So I just wanted to have these tabled.
the one document, the judicial review, cannot be tabled because
Okay.
it is before
Sure.
the courts at this
Perfect.
point in time. So we cannot
That's-
table
that's
that
fine.
document.
Thank you. Thank you. But the other ones will be. So these will be tabled. And so my question is, and I'll start with Onion Lake's question, and that was asked for me to re-ask again, and you can take them to get photocopied once I ask. So Onion Lake met with the Agriculture Ministry, and they have had questions or actually concerns about the lack of consultation when it comes to selling off leases and Crown lands. And I'm just going to read the highlighted section that that they've been waiting for answers from the ministry and have yet to receive any response. So, and quote, in follow-up emails, you mentioned that you were going to get legal consult regarding our request for notification for projects, land sales, and other activities within our traditional territory. And so they are still waiting for a response, and would like to know when is a time frame that they should be expecting a response regarding the legal consult. Because one of the questions they asked in that meeting was, and I was present there, was they wanted notifications not just for sale and leases of Crown land near their nation, but within their treaty territory. So they wanted notification for the whole territory, not lands or leases adjacent to their nation. So is there an expected time frame?
Is that the same question for each of them, or is that just for one specific?
And then you'll take this.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. All right. Thank you. I'm Lee Otten. I'm the Assistant Deputy Minister of Programs. So to your first question about the Onion Lake response letter, we have prepared a response and we expect to have it back to Onion Lake within the next few weeks. We just had the meeting on March the 3rd, and so it's taken some time to draft the letter, and it will be sent out in the next few weeks. Second, to your question about notification of parcels in areas outside of what they've currently been receiving notification, we recognize the request, and it's currently under consideration, and we're looking at what that process could look like. Okay.
Okay, so so when you're looking at that consideration, will you be consulting Indigenous people, or you're only the ministry officials?
So we've been working with government relations and the Ministry of Justice, and recommend if you have questions regarding process that you direct the inquiries to those ministries. They are responsible for the consultation policy framework, and we follow the process under the consultation policy framework, and therefore are consulting with those ministries.
Another question regarding this is, so when you notify, my understanding, and this was at a meeting that I attended with the Agriculture Ministry, There were about 180 letters sent out to impacted communities, Indigenous communities, and I was told there was only 10, where we were told there were only 10 responses. So is there a way that your ministry assesses the impact of the response? Do you assess, like, if there's such a low turnout or a low response, is there a way that you measure the effectiveness of your process?
All right. So in January of 2022, there were 130 notification letters sent. And in response to the pressures communities faced during the coronavirus pandemic, officials called each community included in consultation to ensure they received the notification. This resulted in approximately 300 phone calls per consultation starting in 2020. And we're assessing that process currently to determine if we're going to continue on an ongoing basis or an as-needed basis. Our officials regularly meet with First Nations and Métis communities to discuss concerns and address questions regarding the sale of lease and Crown lands. On average, approximately, as you said, the 10 communities in this case, approximately 10 communities will respond to consultation notifications. And communities have a reciprocal responsibility to participate in the consultation process and to make their concerns regarding potential impacts on treaty and Aboriginal rights known. And so we look to First Nations to also reach out and discuss with our officials.
So I've tabled, I think it's 5 pieces of correspondence that obviously these 5 and more come, and this was all I was able to get at on a short turnaround to get their documents, their letters, to be able to table here. These groups and others have voiced their concerns with the lack of meaningful consultation in their communities. And they all say and continue to say that the government's current process of registered letters, emails, telephone calls, one-off meetings is just not working. And this continues to happen, and this has been something that has always been. And nations, First Nation and Métis nations, have been very frustrated with the 2010 voluntary engagement duty to consult process that you have in place. And the 2010 document does not incorporate the TRC's calls to action. And I know you've referenced the Government and Relations and Justice comes up with the policy framework. Has or does the ministry have a desire or an intention to incorporate the TRC calls to action that could potentially impact the way duty to consult is carried out in the province?
So the consultation policy framework falls under the Ministry of Government Relations and in consultation with the Ministry of Justice, and that question should be put forward to Government Relations.
So just getting back to the agriculture, the ag department here. So we currently have 10% of Crown land left, okay? And we know that in the fall, Crown land is sold. And in the spring, leases are sold, are auctioned off. So you said earlier that on January of this year, you sent out a bunch of letters, and this was with the leases, the auctioning off of leases. That does not take into account the notifications that were submitted in the fall. So do you have a number of how many duty to consult letters were sent out in the fall regarding the sell-off of Crown land?
passed away. He's passed away now. Passed away a couple years ago, but that was Warren's uncle, and he was CCF NED year.
Edgar Kading and Aileen Kramer, just sticking with those two names. Are just
You ever see Messer up your way there? Yeah. No, he's in a big operation.
Is he Tisdale? He's
Yeah.
Tisdale.
Just north of Tisdale.
SAS Power president when I worked there.
Oh, is that right? Selness in your area, he's his son actually. You know Selness. His son's a really good guy. He owns tons of farms. He's up for pictures.
So someone else had it, you know what I mean?
I don't know her well.
I'm still kind of holding out that you're going to proceed.
Such a
So first, I just want to clarify about the amount of Crown land remaining and the amount of land sold. The Crown land in the province has stayed relatively consistent. We have approximately 105 million acres of Crown land in the province, and since 2007, the Ministry of Agriculture has sold approximately 1 million acres of Crown land, which is a reduction of 1%. Second, the numbers that you're looking for, we're just trying to get those numbers, and we'll have them back to you before the end of estimates. Okay.
One other, actually maybe a couple more. When it comes to the leases that are auctioned off, the criteria that is in place right now, it makes it very difficult for First nations or Métis nations to compete in that bidding. Just as an example, and I talk about the Touchwood Hills folks. They use their agricultural land for medicine picking in the spring and the summer. They use it during that time. And during the growing season, that's where their traditional land is. And when that lease came up for sale, they were actually interested in bidding. However, the criteria that was put in place, they couldn't participate. The starting bid was somewhere like maybe $75,000 just to start the bid, just to get on the block. The other criteria that was in place was that for agriculture land, for Indigenous people to bid on that they have to have cattle there all year round. That land has to be used all year round. And in this particular group for both Gorans as well as Kawakatus, they only use that land in the summer months. And that criteria was, they couldn't meet that criteria. And what they had asked is, when it comes to selling off the leases of agricultural land and the criteria that the ministry has in place there, when it comes to the traditional use of those lands by First Nations for their inherent treaty rights, is there any opportunity for the ministry to rethink the criteria that they are putting in place? that is prohibiting First Nations traditional users to bid on those leases.
Yes, I don't know who's from my
Sorry, I missed that. Deep thought. As long as Francis is all I heard.
who's answering the question.
Oh.
I'll get the power back on. Okay? As long as that's moisture.
Is it too wet yet? It's just perfect there, now there's too much.
You're down to a T.
Oh, we don't.
You don't need to, because I'm shitty. There's only one person.
Not many trees in our country, kind of yours either.
Cypress?
Oh, not there, yeah, we're getting way out there.
You open them out.
The mountains,
Walton's one tree.
Mary Ellen's still out there. Jim off.
Yes, I was expecting it.
This is him.
Now I don't know who to throw my support behind.
Oh, you know who too. Carla's great.
Who's got my vote, eh?
Carla's great.
Don't eat the crayons.
We get a vote.
Yeah.
We get a vote.
But
You guys all get along.
you'd be better.
No.
We just have to tear over
You would?
here with my tires.
Is that right?
Who did that to you?
Nobody. No, Trent was thinking about it. I still think we should have taken down this card. Like, why did we miss that opportunity?
Just felt like this maybe being a bully.
Well, that's your fault.
Yeah, I like the idea though. I really did.
It was a great
Yeah. We used to do that back in high school.
If I ever get one of those,
Someone's car.
an electric car, I give you the permission to put it in.
You're, whatever you're driving, awfully close. He passed me your baked potato. Did you see his last car? It was like 7 different shades of silver.
That's great.
I called it the baked potato.
It was only 5 accidents.
What was that song? Code of many colors. Car of many colors.
Betty was making fun of my truck. Derek Myers was making fun of
A
my
Fargo, you got a Fargo guy. A newer Fargo.
Yeah. I can't say,
Oh, you make big
I can't
jokes.
say what Betty called us because we're in committee and but my little guy,
Start
Willie,
with a P?
he got started with an S and finishes with box. My 7-year-old.
Soapbox.
It's a very
Soap.
sweet box.
Soapbox.
Not so
You like your soap.
Are there full options? Okay. Oops. Thank you. I do have the response to your question about how many letters were sent in January of 2021. That would be for the fall auction. We sent 350 letters in January of 2021 for the parcels that went into the fall auction. Pardon me? Oh, and 230 letters were sent in June of 2021. Addressing the lease question, and hopefully I'll be able to answer all the parts that you had. The reason for the minimum bid was that there were improvements on the lease, and that's a requirement, is that the new lessee pays for the improvements of the lease. The criteria of having cattle year-round, it's just during the grazing season that there's the requirement to have cattle on the pasture. In working with producers as they're building their herds, we understand that it's going to take a while for producers to build up their cattle, and so we do allow for time to build up the cattle herd and be able to maintain the herds. And generally, that happens over a 5-year period in order to obtain and retain cattle. We don't require it immediately. When this parcel, when we were looking at posting this parcel in the auction, we did have contact by several First Nations, and as a result of that contact, we did end up pulling that parcel from the auction. It was removed because the ministry wanted to take some time to work with the First Nations and better understand what they were looking for and the needs, and see if there was a way that we could put those considerations into different options should we move forward with leasing this. So we are continuing to have discussions with the First Nations that we've had contact with, and we haven't moved forward with putting that parcel up for lease at this point.
Before we move forward with the rest of our estimates this evening, there are only 2 tables out of the ones that you've provided that we can, or 2 documents that you have provided that I can table. The 2 are the one from Onion Lake, and the other one is from Kahikuwishtoha, all right, that I can table. The reason being is you spoke to the fact that you have the approval of the writers of the letters to submit them, but within the other bodies of the other 2 letters are numerous emails that we cannot table. And so what we can do with those is we can put them on just the members portal, so just the members can see them, but we can't table them as documents here this evening. If there are emails within it, then it's the emails that are the challenge, because one of these has numerous emails that I'm not sure you have the approval of everybody in there to submit it. So I am going to table under ECO 829, the Onion Lake First Nation correspondence in regards to agriculture land sales and consultation dated March the 9th, 2022. And the second one is ECO 929, Kihakawistaka correspondence, or First Nations correspondence, resale of treaty lands dated November 2nd, 2021. Okay.
Thank you.
And so we will continue with our agriculture estimates this evening, and I'll open the floor to questions from committee members and recognize Mr. Weatherspoon.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Thank you, Minister, and all your officials for your time here tonight, and all those that are connected to the important work, and all those in this proud and important sector, thinking of all the producers and ranchers across the province, all those that are involved in the value add side, all those involved in science and research and innovation, all those involved in commerce and trade. It's a pretty incredible industry, and you know, it's made that way by the incredible people that make those contributions. The minister referenced that we're heading into another growing season with off the heels of a very tough growing season for many with the drought that was a serious challenge for so many. I want to focus a bit, maybe just on the front end here for a little bit of our time here tonight on the business risk management programs. I know there's been some adjustments and some improvements, which is a good thing. Now, I wonder, this question, it may not be able to be answered in a way at this table, and if not, just let me know, and maybe there's information that can be provided, or maybe there's information available. But is there a way to break out the sort of the proportional spend in the different sectors for business risk management programs for the provincial cost share side of that? So sort of thinking across the various sectors, breaking out those the total spend and, you know, that proportion.
If I can just ask for clarification, are you talking like the different sectors, whether it's the grains and the livestock and that?
Yeah.
One guy wouldn't want to mess with or tangle with the steels kid. RC? Yeah, well, he's not any more than that. He trains all the tactical pieces. Well, Jim too, I wouldn't want to mess tangle with Jim. There's a song called that, Don't Mess Around with Jim, I think. Jim wrote you. The steels kid for sure. I don't steal the mask off the old Lone Ranger and don't mess around with Jim. That's going in my next speech.
Yeah.
I'd wrestle with Bukowski any day over Steele's kid. Sure. No, but seriously.
You won't have to wrestle, just do you from miles away.
Yeah, well, that's right.
Snipers.
I don't think you'd want to wake Big Gino up.
No. I don't think you will.
You let him hibernate.
Skulls everywhere.
He was quite the force up there. Yep. They treating you all right over there, Jim? I'm totally fine. They're treating you okay, that's good. His standing ovation withdrawal, though. Yeah, you had one this week. You have standing ovation withdrawal. Do you have that?
We were over at
You got a good one on your maiden speech, right?
We're at Suma, Northern Communities today. I gotta go, I can't take it. It's praise. I had a little coffee. Got a voice, not a voice.
Your eyes get bad?
Flavor.
A big old pond. That's a big pond. What is that, like a 30?
Probably bigger.
Just 20? You got it set still. You don't even want to arm wrestle anymore. And so you want to brawl.
Yeah, in you know, talking to my officials, it's pretty tough to break that out. It really is. And the other side of it is too, is we have so many producers out there that are in both livestock and crops. So it's just too difficult to try and extrapolate the numbers between one sector and another.
Would it be the kind of information that I understand it might not be readily available tonight? Is the kind of information that could be put together and brought back to us as through the clerk to the committee?
We can probably discuss it at some point with my officials later, but I just, right now, in talking to them, I just don't see how we can do it because there's so many different variables in that to break that out to that side, even in the participation side too as well. And what, we have crop insurance for livestock producers that is a crop insurance program, and it's not a lot, so there's too many different tentacles to it. I think just in talking to them back there, it would be probably very difficult and to try and pull that together. And we didn't even talk about what kind of human resources it would take or time that way too. So I think it would be pretty tough to try and do.
Okay, no, that's. Well, I appreciate it would be difficult, here tonight. Maybe just looking at some of the components within it. The forage insurance has been there's been strong uptake, and maybe just talk a little bit about what the experience has been on that front. I know if you look at I guess in this last year, certainly it was something that was relied on by a lot of producers. What are you seeing this year by way of a trend for subscription into forage insurance?
So much money in cattle to start off with,
Oh, yeah.
They're pretty lean operations, I think.
Takes generations to build.
Most of my life offices.
Thanks. Yeah, I'll talk a little bit about the program and what I heard from it from producers, and then I'm going to turn it to Jeff to give you some numbers behind it and just where we see it going. And I know in my part of the province in the south central, where I represent over to the southwest, and my colleague from Cypress Hills is here as well, and talking to some of the ranchers that were in the program, really felt, in fact, they really thanked us for the program. I mean, it's a new program. Jeff is going to get into some numbers that really kind of are mind-boggling when we see the numbers going the way they are. So, but I know I did talk to some ranchers in my constituency that actually phoned and thanked us for that program and what it meant to them. It was a lifesaver to some ranchers. It was. And I'll turn it to Jeff. He'll give you some numbers.
Jeff Morrow, Acting President and CEO for SCIC. So the Forage Rainfall Insurance Program is one of the most popular forage insurance plans that we have, and it's a weather derivative program. And we did see an increase of about 750,000 acres in that program in 2021. So it went up to 3.1 million insured acres, up from 2.4 the year before. And as far as the uptick this year, our deadline is April 14th, so it's too early to tell where we'll end up. But certainly from what the minister said about the program, how it's responded, we do expect that it will be a popular program again because of the way the program has responded when we've experienced dry conditions.
So you would anticipate, I would suspect, after last year's experience and the reality folks are facing, and I think the value that the folks that were subscribed to the program, the value they found, you're expecting the higher subscription this year, I would anticipate.
Yeah, I would definitely anticipate an increase, and hopefully we do, because it is a good program, and I think in light of what I've heard from producers in my area that were in it, they were talking to producers that weren't in it, and so I'm just going by hearsay. Whether they sign up or not is another thing, but a lot of them were really considering signing up for the program.
Yeah, I hear similar things too. A lot of folks that were involved in the program really value it. So with respect to the coverage, I know one of the pieces that different producers, different ranchers have been identifying is a desire to have some coverage for some of the cover crops as well. I'm just wondering where that consideration is with crop insurance and the ministry on this front.
Not too much agriculture your way. I have good fishing operations there, fisheries. Bit of vegetable production.
We don't have anything specifically for cover crops right now, but from the forage side of things, we're always interested in hearing from stakeholders and work with stakeholders when we're developing new programs. We hear from them on what their needs are, so if that's a gap that we have right now, certainly we're open to hearing that and looking at what that might look like for the future.
That's appreciated, and I think there will be some folks that have been engaged in this work through some of the ag organizations. I think of the stock growers specifically, and some folks that are just identifying that that would be a value. And I know last year there was just some producers, some ranchers in through that hard hit area that really talked about the value, I think, of some of the cover crop that they had in place. And I know they're going to, continue to utilize, the practice and continue to seed, but just recognizing how it really aided them to get through that horribly tough year. I think that they would really like to see some expansion on those fronts. So there's good folks to work with.
If I could add to that, I think, and you're seeing that in the changes we've made too in the crop insurance. I mean, the one big change this year is putting in the heat unit factor, but there's something else that the crop insurance did that probably didn't get recognized by a lot of people, was the number of weather stations that they put in. Jeff, what was the number? 200?
We have 186 stations.
186 weather stations we have around the province, and that was just something that we heard pretty loud and clear from the producer groups to increase that number, and we did, and that changed the dynamics a lot. Also changed the participation in the program significantly as well.
How many weather stations would we have then in the province?
But for our network that we use to calculate the forage rainfall, we have 186 stations.
So the expansion of 170 was a significant expansion then. I suspect that sort of enabled to be able to have the heat adjustment brought about.
The increase to the weather network was a couple of years back, and it was about a 30% increase to the stations that were there, up to the 186, which we currently have now. And the radius now with 186 stations in terms of coverage is every piece of ag land is within about 30 kilometers of a weather station.
Do you plan to continue to expand that, or do you feel that that's significant coverage you've accomplished? Is that adequate?
in Buffalo Narrows, Jim Waite's operation, and then that one out across. John Waite. The way fisheries out of
I'd say we're looking at other technologies as well to be able to determine kind of the weather pattern, including satellite imagery. So we are interested in finding other ways to make that coverage as relevant as it can be. Sorry.
Oh, that's good. Thanks for that information. Obviously, it's been a really difficult, it's a difficult period of time for the livestock sector right now. The drought, is a big part of that, but there's a lot of pressures that folks are facing. One of the things that I hear regularly from the livestock sector is, the value around the forage program, as we've identified, a desire to see some expansion of some of the supports, continued expansion for the livestock sector. One of the pieces that always comes up is the price insurance program, which has been a pilot that I think is appreciated by folks, but that I really hear that it's without the cost share on it, that it's hindered in many ways, and that I think from an equity perspective as well, if you look at the other programs for other sectors, certainly for grain, I think there's a case around fairness for the sector to have the cost share in place as well for this program. So I guess there's a couple questions here. Is what do you envision with this program? I hear from a lot of livestock producers, a lot of ranchers who say that the program's good, it's important, but it's important that it becomes permanent, and that it's really important that the cost share be established. And they feel that it could be a really valuable backstop then for the sector. And I know the subscription hasn't been too high to date, but they feel that by making it permanent and something folks can count on, and then having the cost share with the other levels of government would be something that would really provide them some protection. So just seeing, I guess, what you're envisioning, these are federal, provincial conversations as well.
Just be a general free-for-all. Test the medical system. Control the rest.
In Jello, you guys gonna do Jello?
It just got weird.
I don't know what you guys are up to.
That's how they do it down south.
Never going camping at Cypress Hills.
I was going to come stop in and
Like
visit Doug
watching
for a
the
couple
old
days,
days
but
fight, it's not gonna take long, so you Jello, we can watch the water.
Dancing. Just easy.
folks doing all right there with the weather down there?
Oh, yeah, they're,
Yeah, power's out.
power's out now, they're big.
Thanks for that. Yeah, I mean, that's one thing we have prided ourselves on, is really engaging with the producer groups. And in fact, we just had discussions with them, some of them yesterday, as a matter of fact. So, This is, it's kind of a complicated issue too, because the price insurance program right now is a Western Canadian thing. So if we take it to, and we have raised it at the federal table, and obviously if you bring something in, then you have to have 7 out of 10 to agree on cost sharing and some of the concerns around that. And we've been working, my team has been working diligently with other jurisdictions to see if there's opportunity to grow the program, and we're trying to do this. There's other challenges around this, and especially around trade. And that's, as you well know, the livestock sector has been under a pretty fine microscope with our biggest trading partner, which we feel is a very fluid trade corridor right now. So especially when you're dealing with a price insurance program versus a production insurance program. So there's challenges around that, which the industry is, also relayed to us that they're concerned about it as well. I do know for a fact, and I've had calls from producers that are in it and are very happy with the program. They are. So, but we have made it a priority at the FPT table, as well as raising this to become a national program and cost shared as well.
Thanks so much. And now, is that part of like the next policy framework discussions then? And right, no, that's
yes, it is.
Yeah, no, I appreciate hearing. Yes, certainly you're hearing the same things from producers that I'm hearing. I think that that the industry really does need a backstop. And I know we all know the value of what livestock producers do in the province. And even from the kind of the environmental perspective and role that they play in managing pasture and grass and protecting some of the biodiversity that's there, I think there's a real solid case to be made to make sure that the industry has the backstops it needs right now to weather some of this serious economic forces that it's up against right now. Do you have any idea as far as so you're engaged in the discussions, federally, any sort of timeline as far as decision points on or certain presentations that would be made that would be part of this timeline?
Yeah, you raise some valid concerns and points too. Obviously, the upcoming meeting at the FPT meeting in July, there'll be a lot of discussion around that, and I guess our concern is the federal government's perspective and their priority on agriculture as a whole, but and even more so in the livestock sector. They seem to have more of an environmental lens on it than agriculture productivity and profitability, if you want to call it that, or even competitiveness. So I would encourage you to reach out to your federal colleagues as well to make sure that agriculture remains a priority from an agriculture production perspective, and some of the challenges around what your federal colleagues are saying from an environmental perspective. So I would call on you to reach out as well.
Yeah, I have no trouble, of course, being public on these matters, and we're here tonight, and it all recorded, permanently enhanced, and video recorded, and always willing to make the case, to any party in Ottawa, whether it's anyone who's elected as a Liberal, or anyone who's elected as a Conservative, or anyone who's elected as a New Democrat, or whatever else, as to the importance of the agricultural sector in our province, and always making sure that we here in this province will stand with the interests of our province and our producers, and goes the same on the energy side. Of course, I know the minister knows this, that there's, on some of these fronts, quite a distinction at times between, say, where the party I rep provincially, and, I'm a provincial member and a provincial caucus member, and we're very clear the interests that we represent, and that'll always be the case, whether we're chatting with whatever one of those federal leaders down in Ottawa. But for sure, and that's part of why we have these conversations tonight as well, to get well on the record the importance of this sector and the importance of that cost share and the importance of having a program like that become permanent. And it's a matter of equity and fairness for the sector. It's a matter of economics for the sector, and it's at a time right now where I think the program's been built out. It's a good tool. All these programs can be improved, but it's at a time right now where folks are really dealing with some tough decisions. And you think of the effort and generations that go into building that breeding stock and that herd in this province, and it's an important program, and I think that it needs to be treated with the urgency that's required. Shifting a little bit to Agri-Stability, we've had conversations and debates on this front. Of course, as you know, we had advocated along with producer groups around the elimination of the reference margin limit, and it was great to see that action occur, and I know that was of benefit to the livestock sector, last year, and certainly moving forward. But if you look at what producers are facing and what the sector's facing right now, with of course, a real difficult drought year, and the real impacts that they're continuing to weather on that front financially, and that impede their position. But then also, if you look at the environment around just the inputs, the incredible inflation that folks are facing with respect to inputs, getting into another growing season here, folks really do need to have backstops that they can count on and that are going to be there for them. And so going back into something that you and I have had a bit of debate over the last couple of years on, but it goes back to the payment rates of Agri-Stability, and I know, of course, I'd pushed hard last year along with producers on this front to increase Agri-Stability payment rates to 80%. Producers are now going into, they're in that tough time where they're weathering the impacts of last year. They've got inputs that are really through the roof here right now. Are you ready to make a commitment in the current year in a timely way here to increase Agri-Stability payment rates to 80%?
Got 6 kids.
Yeah.
There you go.
How many siblings do you have?
4.
That makes you a good wrestler.
No. For my 50th birthday, actually. What did I tell you? I did it for my 50th birthday. Drove to Vancouver to wrestle. Yeah. It was a grappler. Vancouver. Drove to Sirius, my wife. Wrestled the guys over home.
When you were 50,
For my 50th birthday.
who was the person you wrestled?
He's the toughest guy. He actually trained with Grace Gracie.
Yeah. So how'd that go?
You did tell me.
How do you figure that?
That's great.
I held him for about 20 minutes off from him, and then he just totally slayed the boots.
That's wonderful.
It was worth it. Yeah, I could hardly eat for 3 days. Picked my jaw.
Right now at this time with the removal of the reference margin limit, we found that when we did that, that brought in a bigger perspective of producers that were eligible versus changing the compensation rate. So that's why we went that way. Obviously, the projected number for 2020, just with the removal of the reference margin limit, the projection is a payment of increase of over $12 million to producers. So that's obviously going to have an impact to livestock producers and grain producers as well. So we felt it pretty important that was, and even talking to stakeholders, which we did very extensively, that the reference margin limit was the one big hurdle that they wanted to see gone, and that's the one we looked at and did it. Any other changes to Ag-Stability right now are probably going to take place in the next policy framework that, hopefully in July we can come to agreement with, obviously any changes like that. We look at right now, there's got to be agreement with the provinces and the federal government on what changes are going to come forth in the 2023 and moving forward.
Okay, well, we've canvassed as well as a debate over the last couple of years. I would submit that and I recognize that there's going to be the next policy framework brings about the renewal of programs or in 2023. But here in 2022, I think that producers have really been through a lot, and I think and we know that producer groups are united on this front with the call for payment rates to be increased. Of course, we had pushed hard for the reference margin limit to be removed, along with producer groups, as well as the payment rate to be fixed. And I think it's disappointing. Food security is an important thing, and the role producers play within it is so important. And if you look at the tough times that many have been through, I think that we need to make sure those backstops are there. So I won't make it another question because we'll get into a protracted debate on this matter and not cover other areas. But I would just submit again that certainly we need trusted programs that are going to work in 2023, and when we look forward and through the work with the federal government and the other provinces around the next policy framework. But producers really do need a backstop they can count on right now, and improvements where they can be received. And I would just urge the minister's attention back to this front. Something that I hear from the livestock sector particularly is that their margins these days, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Minister, are often so tight. And so when you're talking about 70%, it's if you chat with ranchers and producers in this province, they tell me that that's just it doesn't work. In fact, many would say that there maybe needs to be a conversation about a sectoral approach to this and recognizing the challenges of livestock producers and just how slim those margins are and how quickly they can be put into a really desperate situation. Has there ever? So I'm pushing for an increase, certainly for everybody, to the 80%. Has there been conversations or considerations about doing something, having another trigger in place for the livestock sector, though, recognizing the tight margins that they operate in?
Thanks for that. And I guess I could go on for quite a while here about what we have done and I'm going to for a bit here, because I think you've opened something that really has to be said for a lot of things of what we as a government have done. And I guess I look at right off the bat at crop insurance payout of well in excess of $2.3 billion that went out the door in a very timely manner. So, when you look at record crop insurance coverage this year at over $400 an acre average. So I look at that, and I look at even the Forage and Rainfall insurance program, which is a program we brought into to the sector, of which they do really appreciate. And I think I've got the number right, Jeff, but I think that program alone paid out $66 million through crop insurance to livestock producers here in the province of Saskatchewan. So, I think when you ask something about sector specific, that it obviously creates a lot of problems. Obviously, it would create trade challenges, and we've heard that from the sector as well too. So. I think we're obviously the next policy framework is in discussions, and that's some of the things that we are looking at. And this team has been phenomenal at that, and really looking at what would be eligible expenses that the livestock sector could use, across all sectors, not just livestock, but really give some more equity. So. But I think that something really has to be said, that what we did for the livestock sector, and I'm going to give echoes and kudos to some people in the room because they really do deserve it. We put $277 million out into the producers' hands in probably the fastest fashion that has ever been done in this country, not in this province, in this country. And that goes to Jeff and the entire team at Crop Insurance, without increasing human resources. And I had examples. I had a gentleman phone me, put his application, had his check in 3 days. So echoes and kudos to the entire team at Crop Insurance for really putting this, and we heard it loud and clear from the producers. I just heard it on Friday night from a rancher. He said that program saved my son's ranch. So I think we've done a great job for all sectors, and we've got we do have the best coverage programs, both from a crop side and a livestock side. When you look at the price insurance, you look at the forage and rainfall insurance and the enhancements we made to that this year, the enhancements we made to crop insurance on the price options where all crops are now included. I think we've done a phenomenal job for the ag sector in this province, and that's echoes and kudos to this team behind me that deliver these programs.
Yeah, no, thanks. And I'd like to echo that as well. I mean, what folks were facing last year was devastation, and it's not easy to administer programs and to obviously get dollars to folks in the timely way that they need them. So thank you to everybody involved in the sector on that front as well. With respect to the programs you identifying that we have the best programs in Canada, and I agree, and we should because this we've got the agricultural industry in this province is the backbone of this province, so we should have that. And some of the improvements that have been brought have been important improvements as well. As far as identifying the dollars for crop insurance and the payout, I'd say that's important. That's how the program's supposed to work. It was a real devastating year last year, so obviously the payment was significantly larger in scale and magnitude to the challenge that was in place. But that's what these programs are built for. So I do want to say thanks to everybody, those that are sitting at this table and behind you here tonight, and those that are involved in the administration of these programs across Saskatchewan. And to do that, just looking at the next policy framework, of course, there's a level of uncertainty then, as to what is going to be accomplished and what programs are going to look like. It has to be a situation where we're looking to continuous improvements on this front, because there's been some good improvements brought about. We've talked about some of them tonight. We've talked about a few other possible improvements, things like, important pieces around permanency to the price insurance, around cost share on that front, pieces, things like expanded coverage around things like cover crop, discussion around payment rates and adequacy on those fronts. At this point, I know the minister and your team will have been quite engaged around the next policy framework pieces. What level of confidence do you have right now as to what kind of program, what kind of commitments are going to be there for producers heading into 2023? Do you have any concern that you won't have this is across Canada piece, it's the other provinces, it's the federal government. Do you have any concern that there would be a rolling back of any supports, or do you see this as an opportunity to improve that backstop for producers?
Yeah, in discussion with my colleagues here, and it's obviously it's concerning on where we go. Obviously, we're always looking to improve the programs, and what are things that the industry stakeholders are looking for. We through the month of February, we're very engaged with both the crops, the crop side and the livestock side on things that they would have liked to have seen changed or enhanced into not only the business risk, but also just in the programs that we also offer to the ag sector as well. I can be very confident saying that there will not be a rollback in level of support. I think the challenge we have here, quite frankly, is a willingness of a federal government to accept some aspects, obviously the biggest aspect, making agriculture a priority and making sure that we are, as producers, are competitive. That was the one word that myself and the team really tried to get into the whole discussion, was competitiveness, and so that the primary producers in this province can be economically viable. And as I said earlier in a comment, and I'll reach out to you again, as your colleagues, the federal NDP have negotiated a truce, if you want to call it that, with the Liberal or with the federal government, that it's really important that you convey that to your federal colleagues as well, of the importance of agriculture, not only to the province of Saskatchewan and primary producers, but to this country as a whole, especially when you talk about food security, as you did, and our concerns around that as well. And to be competitive, and one of the challenges we're having, and obviously we're seeing it with, once again, is the impact of the carbon tax and it's having on the impact in the ag sector, and it's having a big one. So as far as your question and back into the program, I'm very confident that you won't see a rollback in the levels of support, both from a federal perspective and ours as well. But my team will be meeting shortly with federal and provincial counterparts, and we'll be having a meeting sometime coming up here later this spring, and then we'll have the big meeting in July, where hopefully some consensus can be made by all the jurisdictions, which has to be agreed upon by all the provinces. So, and obviously there's some concerns around that from other jurisdictions as well.
No, thanks for that undertaking around the backstops and the need there, and certainly there's a lot of pressures that folks are facing in the industry right now. The minister referenced the carbon tax and the newest increase here, and of course he would know that we've been clear and public in our call for that to be stayed as well, and as well we're actually for making sure that we've got a Supreme Court that's ruled on this, and producers are paying the price. We need to make sure that there's carve-outs, offsets, rebates, recognition for producers who right now don't have any of that recognition for their roles. I'll get into that line of questions a little bit later on here. But again, just as far as the federal piece and making sure the minister understands, we will be crystal clear, that it's Saskatchewan's interest that we will advance. That's the approach I've always taken. It's the approach our caucus will take, and that'll be whether we're chatting with the Liberals, the Conservatives, the NDP on these matters, from equalization through to through to fertilizer, through to trade, and through to business risk management programs and more. Maybe that just is a bit of a segue. I wasn't going to go there next, but it's a natural leaping off point to touch in on, and that's the federal government's brought these hard caps on fertilizer that just don't seem to make sense for this province or for producers' interests with respect to food security, with respect to even from an environmental perspective. It doesn't respect sort of the approach of producers here, the 4R approach that's been established for a long time. And so I'm wondering on this front, the hard cap really doesn't seem to make sense, and that the timeline is looming that they have their 2030. It seems to me that there's a reasonable discussion around intensity on these fronts to make sure that we're as efficient as we can, to make sure we're as productive as we can. But our producers should be as productive as they can be, and then utilizing practices to make sure that they're managing in an efficient way and in an incredibly responsible way, which is, I think the approach of the vast majority of producers, and I know commitments of this government. So just as far as the federal government's hard cap, the 30% by, I think, 2030, as opposed to some sort of intensity-based model or one that reflects the importance of production and food security and, a more efficient approach to feeding the world, which reduces the emissions intensity on yield. I guess I'm interested to hear what undertakings the minister's taken on. How have you represented Saskatchewan on this front?
steel supports it.
Well, it's interesting you raise this because this has been a key issue for obviously for me as a minister, but also for the entire team, is the federal government's whole idea of 30% reduction and where we get to with that, or where they want to end up with that. I have reached out personally to the federal minister on numerous occasions. Every time we meet, say, why don't we use our dollars wisely here and really look at research, innovation, and new technology. So that's that's where we've had it headed, and I think as a government you've seen that in our commitment to research dollars. This also fits hand in hand with higher yielding crops, where you see even obviously a huger impact on it, but. I think this all falls, there's a lot of comments I want to make on this one because I think it's really important, just in light of what's happened in Ukraine over the last while. When you talk about food security, the way we are, this federal government in this scheme of a 30% fertilizer reduction seems to fall totally on the negative side of where we really want to get to with food security and food production and feeding the world, and that's what we do here. So. Canada has reached out on a consultation basis on this, and my team has been involved with stakeholders now as having discussions around this, and I think the deadline is June 3rd for making that commitment. So, but I think this is just something now that. The world is talking about food security. The whole world is talking about it. So I'd hope the federal government would change its narrative. And that'll be our focus in going into the next rounds of discussions is really, as I've said earlier, the whole thing about primary agriculture and primary production and our producers being competitive and feeding the world. And we'll continue to make that our priority. We always have. I've had the opportunity now to raise it with the federal. Well, I would have to think 5 or 6 times at least that we've had discussions about this. Maybe not that many, but I know in every meeting I've had, we've raised this discussion about the fertilizer reduction with her. So it's very important to us, and we'll continue. To advocate on behalf of the industry here. And as I said, I think we can achieve some goals with research, innovation, and technology. And we're going to see some of that. And we're hoping in July that we'll be able to show the federal minister and my counterparts from across this country some of that research and innovation at the FPT meeting here.
Yeah, thanks for those comments, and I hope the federal government's able to adjust course on this front, because the current way they're imposing this hard cap is it just doesn't make sense, and it didn't make sense before the horrible conflict, the unforgivable invasion of Ukraine by Putin. But certainly the world has awoken to the food security realities that have been present for a long time. And Canada definitely plays a very important role on these fronts. I think of, I was reading some pieces around, where Africa gets its grains, and it's Ukraine and it's Russia. And you think of the food security challenges that are already so present through so many African nations. So anyways, I appreciate that we've touched on this piece, and the minister is identifying and recognizing the importance, and wish him continued success in making that case. With respect to trade itself, obviously trade is so critical to our province as a whole as exporters, so critical to agriculture, and it's always it needs to be a steadfast effort of a government to be expanding trade markets. We know as well where you're at the mercy of others at times making decisions around your products. We know the horrible frustrations with respect to some of the actions of China just a few years back, other countries as well. So making sure you have those trading that trade relationship and that you're expanding into new markets is important. But right now, our world simply can't look away from the atrocities, the war crimes, the human rights atrocities that we're seeing being committed in Ukraine by Putin. And it needs to be certainly a Team Canada approach, and in being there, standing united, and we need to do our part as a province, and we stand united as a legislature on this front. But with respect to securing those markets that Russia currently serves, on certainly the potash side, and certainly as well on the energy side, these are very important that we pursue as much as we can, expanding our trade and taking up that space, doing all we can to cripple Putin's ability to fund this horrible war, and to make sure that there's consequences. With respect to agriculture plays a big role on this front. Certainly our ability to export grains and food products to those markets is important. So I'm just interested, in light of the horrible situation our world faces at a time where we can't look away from what's going on, what additional efforts has your ministry brought about in working with trade and export, for example, to go and access and secure those markets that are currently being served by Russia?
Thanks for the question. I could probably talk the entire hour on this one, but I don't think you want that. But I think you touched on something that's obviously near and dear to this government, as recognized by the opening of the 8 trade offices that we have opened. And I think I can almost recite them all, but I did miss one when I wrote them down. But you look at Mexico City, London, Ho Chi Minh City, Singapore, New Delhi, Tokyo, Shanghai, and Dubai, and London, and the Premier was just there and opened that office. And so I think you're seeing a commitment from the government to really look at, our trading partners and opportunities in all aspects, and agriculture is going to be forefront in all of that. When you look at our growth strategy to 2030, the points that are made, 7 of them are really have an ag focus on them and an ag impact on them. I have personally been on 2 trade missions myself and talked to industry players and companies globally. In Mexico, we talked to the largest oat buyer in Latin America, who buys all his oats from Western Canada, and the opportunity of growth around there. And we see, and we're still in discussions with those. Same thing when we went to India and Bangladesh and Dubai, and we talked to all sectors, from the pulse side, from the grain side, and from the canola side as well. It's an interesting dilemma. It's actually quite a great story that we should really be telling, because these companies are coming to this country to look for a consistent supply with a country that they know they can do business with, and I think that's important to say. And we're starting to see that. One company I met with in Bangladesh, who at the time 80% of their crush was palm oil, 20% was canola. And talking to the father and son of this company, that they were hoping in 3 years they could flip that. And obviously looking to Canada for an opportunity for that side of it. Talked to a pulse processor in Dubai, who sources virtually all the lentils and peas that he can out of Western Canada. And of course, where Saskatchewan lies with all of that. We're #1 in the world. So obviously these companies recognize what we have here. They recognize the supply and the product that we have. But there is some challenges too. And some of the challenge with some of these countries is obviously the trade agreements. And I had the honor, privilege, I would say that, to speak at a national conference in India about with the pulse sector, and raise that concern about the tariffs and how it impacts producers here on making the decision on whether they're going to grow that crop or whether they're going to switch because of how it impacts the price side. So we've seen India, as a result, over the last few years, remove the tariff side of it. I don't think that was the total result. I think probably because they ran out of production as well. So I think it's important for us as a government, and I think you're seeing some vast expansion from the industry companies here in this province and in Western Canada, that are having opportunities to grow their business away from China, away even from some markets in the United States where they're seeing opportunity for growth, whether it's in Indonesia, whether it's in Europe, or whether it's in Dubai and India, Bangladesh, Japan. We're seeing expanded growth there too. So we are seeing expanded opportunities for growth. We recognize it, and obviously we recognize it by opening these offices, and the importance of us of having people there that can come to our door and say, what do you have that I'm interested in? And we can show them and engage them with the right industry players here in the province as well.
No, it's a very important effort, and a lot of what the minister recognizes, sort of the continuous efforts that the government's been bringing about on this front, and trade expansion is so critical. I think that we have to look at the current situation we face as something that should cause us to really all redouble our efforts, and to calibrate an effort that can be effective in response as well to those Russian markets. And when you think of all those African nations and the food security there, that's dependent upon Ukraine and Russia. There's an economic imperative to all of this, but there's a moral imperative as well, and in making sure that we're playing our role within food security. And so I would urge that lens as well to be applied in just the current situation, the changing world. Certainly, without a doubt, when we're talking food and fuel and fertilizer and so many other goods, we should be the choice supplier around the world where we can do that logistically, and certainly agriculture plays such an important role. With respect to the Farm and Ranch water program, there was some good improvements brought last year. A couple pieces that are outstanding that producers continue to call for, and I'm just wondering if there's some movement to cover these pieces. One of them is to ensure coverage for electrification as well, for power to be established to a pumping site. Certainly the program is very important to establish a trustworthy water source. The minister would know well the challenge many folks face on this front. Certainly this is the purpose of the program. But as I chat with many ranchers and producers on this front, moving water is critical to that, and that solar panels aren't going to cut it for what folks are requiring on this front. So to include the cost of having power brought to a site so that they can pump that water and utilize it. Has the minister heard that case, and is there an openness to adjust that program to include power?
Solar panels don't cut it, that's what I heard. Period.
Not even on my calculator.
Hopefully the battery technology gets better than what's in these.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Well, that's the whole power piece too, right? Like the whole battery storage piece. Yeah.
Lose it sitting.
Turn on someone like us, right? You can email stuff like.
It works better here.
Oh, okay.
Emails don't always come back to me. They do. If there's cold beer.
I don't think the new candidate shares your thoughts on that.
On which?
On anything.
I like to hear you ask these questions. I know you can't throw them under the bus, but.
See why you're rooting for Carla. Yeah. Think there'll be any more?
I don't know. It's getting tight now. Like it's getting closer to it. It's fairly quick
What's the
process.
deadline?
Yeah, one more. I think there's a cutoff in April based on your timeline for like vetting and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah, once again, you raise a program that is probably near and dear to my heart, and plus my colleague from Cypress Hills as well, because we were on the design team of that program, and obviously it's worked out very well. I just asked my team how much we've invested in that since the inception, which is well over $70 million has gone into to probably one of the best programs that's really impacted the South, well, the whole province, but really impacted the Southwest for long-term sustainable water. So when and we always look at program parameters and things around it, and we've heard it too on the electrification side, and the challenge you have with it obviously is the cost and the impact. So then there has to be trade-offs on to what side of it. Obviously the program has limits. Each producer is eligible for $50,000, and then if you're a livestock producer now, we raised it for the short term. Well, that cut off on March 31st to $150,000 for cattle producers, but we gave them a 6-month extension to get the work done, of which we are covering 70% of that $100,000, and the producers covering 30%. So, you know, I mean, we'll always look at changes going forward in the next policy framework agreement. It's a program that is near and dear to this province and to the producers of this province, and I think it's the only province that has it. So, you know, we look at things, but obviously then there has to be trade-offs on how you balance that. But electrification is, we've heard it, but it is a very expensive part of it.
Yeah, thanks. I think it makes sense for the inclusion, and it's great to establish your water resource, but the power is an important piece to move that water. So I'll leave that there. The other piece that I'll just leave as I guess consistent advocacy on this front is the adjustment of the threshold. I know producers have made the call on this front as well, and the 50,000 income threshold requirement right now. I know the call by producer groups is to have that reduced to 10, and that, you know, I've certainly heard from some folks who you know, have been shut out in the current program with these parameters. So I would urge, continue to urge for that to be adjusted as well, moving forward. I'll focus my attention here. I guess you have some real challenges producers are facing right now going into this growing season. You have inputs that are really through the roof. We have this extraordinary situation that's going on from an international perspective that's, you know, contributing to that situation. And we have supply chains that are in a bad state as well when you're talking about the availability of fertilizer and farm chemicals and implements, and of course, you know, seed and everything else. You know, the timeliness on these fronts really matter, so do the costs. So just with respect to the agricultural supply chains, you know, and we're getting down to that time where you know, days are going to matter when products are supplied. And then also with respect to inflation, some of those pieces are understood with some of the contributing factors. There's also always concern with respect to the potential of price gouging. And so I guess I'm just looking to the minister to see, with respect to the very challenged supply chains that pose a real risk to producers at this time, and also the challenge of inflation around inputs and the potential of price gouging. I'm just wondering what actions this minister is undertaking on this front.
Jim gave you that question. Thanks, Jim. That's a good one.
Thank you. We've been watching this. Quite tightly, and I do have some numbers that we can share. So, as of March 22 versus September of 21, urea is up 71%, phosphorus is up 29%, potash is up 34%, and sulfur is up 50%. So we have, obviously, the team has been reaching out to suppliers, and here's what we're hearing. So supply and availability in Saskatchewan are found to be tight to satisfactory by major suppliers. So it's satisfactory as well. Solid fall and spring demand has obviously replenished the inventory, but the farmers have it on site. So. And we've also seen where, in some cases, and I can give examples in my own constituency, talking to some farmers that obviously didn't have a crop last year, will virtually not have to put any fertilizer in the ground. Their nitrogen levels are very, very high, to the tune, if you put it on today's prices, as the one young farmer told me, it's saving him a lot of money because, and he's tested quite thoroughly. So we're seeing that side of it too. When you look at the fertilizer on hand, just about 90% of the farmers have their fertilizer on hand. And I think the other side you really have to look at when you look at it, the prices are up. Yeah, they are. But I think you have to look at the other side too when you look at the commodity prices. They're the highest they've ever been. Crop insurance coverage at $404 an acre, and I have talked to a lot of producers that have phoned and said thank you very much for a program that's going to make it a lot easier for them to put a crop in the ground. And as far as price gouging, we obviously we watch that too. But that's a federal government issue through the Competition Bureau and challenges around that. But what my team is monitoring it and watching it. But supply chain has been impacted from all sides of it. From as you said, herbicides coming into the country. Even to the point where my neighbor couldn't get tires for his new air cart, so it's all over. But they found the solution and got it fixed. So the supply chain is impacted as a result of what's happening in Russia and Ukraine as well. So, but when you see the fertilizer prices that way, and you see the commodity prices, obviously the record high commodity prices is definitely offsetting some of that challenge that some of the producers have said.
Yeah, it's a real challenging situation, and certainly it's important we're engaged provincially and nationally on these fronts. With respect to grain contracts, obviously last year was catastrophic for many folks, and many producers ended up in a situation where they faced serious stress and hardship and weren't able to fulfill their grain contracts. Those were dealt with in different ways across the industry. But the one thing that seems to have come out of that is a greater awareness as to the terms of a contract, and as well as some appetite to see some greater transparency, possibly some standards or improvements within them. There's a role for the province to facilitate some of that conversation with producers and the industry. Are you engaged in any sort of facilitation on that front, or a bit of a working group with producers in the industry to look to bring about some improvements on a go-forward basis?
Thanks for that. Obviously, we were very engaged in this process with the grain contracts. I and the team, we personally did reach out to every president and CEO of every grain company that does business here in the province of Saskatchewan. We also reached out to the lenders. We had some good discussion with all the ag lenders in the province as well about concerns that they may have had with some of the contracts. And of course, we reached out to the producer groups. We really did. We heard it, from all sectors on it, on the process. Now, the Canada Green Act is open, and some of the, changes that could be made in there on some of the wording. But at the end of the day, it's a business decision by a producer to enter an agreement. And I think you raised a very good point. It probably did flag a big awareness with a lot of people, and we heard it from some saying, I'm going to look at the contracts, and whether I sign one or not is going to be a business decision that they will make. And I think that, as a government, is where we have to really respect the business itself for a producer and the grain company in coming to terms. And, and I just want to say this, because I think it's important in reaching out to the grain companies that I did, and I heard it pretty clear from all of them. They were doing everything possible to work with the producers to work through this, whether it was a deferral or working through or taking other commodities. But here's what I really got from every one of them that I thought was very sincere and dear. They said, we do not want to lose a customer. We want to protect our customers and our clients, and we want them coming back. So I felt very confident in what they were trying to achieve and trying to do with work and working it through with the producers. And for the most part, that's what I heard from producers too. They worked it through, whether they offered another commodity or whether they did a deferral or however they worked on the payout. So. But the one thing it did raise, as you said, it raised an awareness for everybody to really have a look at the contracts, because I signed contracts all my years of farming too, and very seldom you looked at everything. You looked at the price you were guaranteed and what you were going to get and what your delivery date was. So I'm sure everybody's looking at the fine print more now too.
Could you provide a bit of an update on the agenda around better supporting meat processing development within the province? I know there's it's I think it's we've seen the supply chain on this side exposed as well, and the consolidation and the challenges and the lack of competitiveness and the position it puts our industry and producers in and consumers in, and it would really be in the province's interests. And I know it's not been without effort over the years, and lots of good folks that have made some things work, and I know some that haven't succeeded. But there's a real desire in the province to grow a meat processing industry in the province in a more significant way than we have right now. There's some successful operations to look to as models on this front. Of course, it offers choice and options, markets for producers, often something quite local to them as well, and it provides the consumer with that choice as well. And I know I value buying Saskatchewan beef and Saskatchewan livestock, and we work with different abattoirs and different producers on that front. But I know I'm not alone. I know that there's a large consumer appetite for the exceptional livestock that we raise in this province, for the exceptional beef that we raise in this province. And I look to some of the incentives that are there, and I'm not sure that this is, I think there probably has to be some other measures as well, but I look to the value add tax incentive program that's in place. And in that case, the threshold is just so high by way of the requirement for investment that it really shuts out the vast majority of the types of smaller operations that may be able to be feasible and that are scalable, and where the economics could work on this front. So I know I've chatted with different folks on this front who seem to feel that a program tailored with some incentives, and looking at that Sask value add incentive Right now, the threshold is just far too high, and then some other pieces that could help fire up some investment. That's the other piece that I didn't identify. Of course, what we're talking about is investment into rural communities, and we're talking about some local jobs, and they might be maybe they're smaller operations that we're looking to, but those are still really valued if you look at if those can be sustainable and successful, distributed across the province. They can certainly be good for producers, for rural communities, and for consumers.
Still, you got a good one down in Shawnee, don't you?
It's,
A good dab before there.
there's a couple of them.
Yeah. You guys have a chance to have that prime rib last night at the Cattlemen's Center. I just look forward to that event every year. Told all my new colleagues, it was one of the first things I told them. Like they're getting, welcoming them as new LAs, I was giving them a few tips. Like, you make sure you get to that Cattlemen's event. Had good conversations, of course, but like melting around the prime rib. Left with two big ones.
Yeah, there's, Easton, Council, Easton Cadillac, North Council, got the long students.
How's that chef doing down there, Steele? Rusty?
Good, he was there last Saturday, he had a 5-course steak and beef supper there with meat supplied by the ranchers in the Southwest. Well, it's kind of a fundraiser, but it's more of
I
a
saw that
marketing
there's a
promotional
producer.
thing.
Yeah, I saw that actually, I saw that.
Yeah.
Former premier was sharing it, I think.
Coulter was there.
Cool.
Coulter's cattle and Dan Black's. Well, they're doing good.
That was the first statement you made in the chamber. You're talking about Rusty.
Oh, it could've been, yeah.
My colleagues, they thought you said something else when you're up there.
Oh, you gotta take control.
I've never seen the raw plastic gun so hard.
These chairs don't roll on carpet very well. Thanks. It's something we really have been engaged in, and I really want to commend the team again. A good example is Donald's Fine Food in Moose Jaw and what they're doing there, and the expansion of the hog facility there to another case. So, we have, you said the tax incentive, and then we have the SLIM program too that really allows the cost sharing for an abattoir or existing one if they want to become more efficient, which really would allow them to expand their slaughter capacity to that's cost shared 50-50 up to $500,000. So that allows them some opportunity to that. We have also provided funding to Saskatchewan Stock Growers Association to really look at a study on small beef processing. So I think that's where you probably put it in the hands of the producers to see if there's some opportunity. So we've done that, and we'll wait for them to come back with something on that side of it as well.
Thank you for that. Yeah, no, it's such an amazing industry, and any way that we can support some options for producers and some rural economic development and great choice for consumers. I think that we should be pursuing it. And I'm real pleased that the stock growers are engaged in that work as well. With respect to, we touched on it earlier, and it's the imposition of that federal carbon tax on producers, right? And, the challenging situation it puts folks in. And the fact that, think of grain drying and whatnot, there's just not alternatives for producers. And, producers play such a, invaluable role as environmental stewards through management and practices and sequestration and, practices like zero-till. And as well, I think of all the livestock folks with protection of grass and the management of wetlands, and what that means, from an environmental and an emissions perspective is significant. So the federal the federal government imposed the carbon tax. The Supreme Court has ruled that producers are left now, paying it, but without any sort of a rebate or without an offset structure, without value recognizing their role as environmental stewards. And I know a lot of producers are, looking for that sort of relief and recognition. So I know the province is looking to take over have a provincial plan on this front to take things over on this front. I think that, that makes sense for the province to have its own climate change, plan. But we need to make sure that producers have the recognition and the value placed on their role as as environmental stewards. So looking for an update, I guess, as to that provincial submission that the province has made or is making to the federal government, and where things are at for producers to make sure that they're getting, an offset structure, a rebate, and incentives for their work as environmental stewards.
Stanley texting me back and forth here. He's there with the firefighters lobby in Ottawa, so just like he's having a.
Did he tell you orange is the new red?
I was letting him know.
Just posted that.
Oh, did he?
Yeah.
I was giving him a compliment. I said I just saw your kid play hockey just now. Totally takes after Larissa because he's got a good shot, can skate well. Good head about himself on the ice, Our two kids, so his kid's a year older than William, and his kid is big right now, for his age. Part of the guy's not, he's a year younger, he's not big right now for his age, so that guy's laughing up there on the ice, and our little guy can skate pretty well, so he's chasing around silently out there, they're having a fun day. I think William comes to about his belly buttons. Yeah. In this case, like Warren's kid skates well too. Like he's huge. Good.
I know this one will take me to the top of the hour, so that was probably your last question. No, and you raised it, farmers and ranchers have always been price takers, and the carbon tax has always had a huge negative impact on the whole ag sector, because nobody realizes that we're paying, the primary producer in this province is paying the freight on every bushel of grain that leaves this country, and we're paying the freight on every pound of beef that leaves this province as well. So it's all reflective in the price that the farmer or rancher takes. So Obviously, we've been adamantly opposed to the carbon tax, still are opposed to it because it's going to have a huge impact on a lot of factors in the ag sector, and number one being competitive. And so then that you get back and you start talking about the whole thing about global food security and the challenges around that. So, obviously, the challenge we're having with the federal government, quite frankly, on this is the federal government won't recognize anything that we've already done. And that is obviously very disturbing. When we were pioneers, and I will say that we were pioneers in zero-till, continuous cropping, to lead the whole ag sector in this entire country. So we've done what we were supposed to do, and now the farmers and ranchers will be somewhat penalized for it because they won't be recognized for early action, and that's the position the federal government has taken, which is very unfortunate. But that doesn't mean we give up on our lobby effort and our concerns in raising this. Obviously, the whole prairie resilience and the carbon offsets and everything else is being led through the Ministry of Environment, so that would probably be a question you would probably want to direct to them.
Okay, thanks for that. Certainly producers are now, are hit on this front, and I think as the province looks to take over this program, it's going to be really important that producers have the recognition and value placed on their work. So we will take it up with an environment as well. Obviously, it's real important to producers. Moving along a little bit. We've talked, I guess I just wanted to give, before I get into a little bit of some questions around irrigation, I wanted to give a shout out and recognition for getting that PST off of dugouts and some other services there as well. I first became aware, and I know the minister knows I advocated on this front. I first became aware of this when meeting with the Cattlemen's, Association, and I appreciated their advocacy on this front. And it was good to see the government act on this front. It didn't make sense at all when we're trying to encourage, dugouts and water sources to have that PST. So good work there. With respect to irrigation development in the province, I heard in your opening remarks you referenced a number of irrigable acres that have been brought online in the last, I think you said 2 years. Okay, so the number then was 20,000. I know last year when I was asking these questions, the number was 9,500. So we've sort of, I guess our pace improved even a little bit more this year. So about 10,000 irrigable acres, new irrigable acres a year. I want to get an assessment of what the inventory is for irrigable acres right now where there hasn't been subscription or uptake. I believe in the past you'd shared that there was 35,000 infill acres with sort of the current assets or projects that are in place. And then I know there was, a look to developing another, there's the whole big project, but looking at, I think in the more immediate, there was another 50,000 irrigable acres that seemed to be realistic to bring online, a total of 85,000. But I guess what I'm looking for right now is what's the inventory right now of irrigable acres that haven't been subscribed to, and just where we're going on this front.
I'll open it up just a bit, and then I will get Penny to come and give an update on what you're asking for on the stat side, because, it's encouraging to see this increase in the acres, and I think it's all part and parcel to just the whole ag industry and where it's going to. But obviously, we saw it as a priority, and that's why we increased the irrigation funding again, because we see it, and that really gives opportunity for other irrigators, even outside the irrigation districts, to look at opportunities for growth in irrigation around that. So, and I can tell you from my perspective in our office, we're seeing a lot of interest from other parts of the province that are really looking at irrigation development as well. So, but I will turn it over to Penny to give you an update on the infill and the numbers and where we're at right now today. So, Penny. Hope I maintain it.
Hello, I'm Penny McCall, Assistant Deputy Minister for Regulatory and Innovation. And to respond to your question, yes, we are well on track to meet our growth plan goals. We had identified 85,000 acres within that. We anticipate that about 35,000 of those will be infill acres, so within irrigation districts, and another 50,000 outside of that. And at a rate of around, over the last 2 years, on average 10,000 a year, we should be able to meet that by our 2030 growth plan goals. Now, where this is coming from, there is non-district irrigators that are interested, but working with Water Security Agency to identify, there's 6 development areas that they're looking at outside of the Lake Diefenbaker expansion area that we want to target for some of this expansion.
Thanks for that information. And so there's the 35,000 infill acres right now. We've talked about 20,000 new acres being brought on these last 2 years. Have they utilized those acres? Is 35 now 15, or just an update on where that inventory is at?
So of the acres brought on recently, 67% of those are in non-districts. And so, again, if you're looking at the proportion, the majority will be outside of infill areas. So I guess that's 33% within the infill areas.
No, thanks for that update. So when maybe describe a little bit what the projects outside the district areas look like.
All right, in response to that question, it's difficult to find a commonality because every project is a little bit different. In fact, some might be out of a river, some might be out of other reservoirs. In fact, there's actually looking at some as pilots in conjunction with a drainage project to find other water sources that can be utilized for irrigation. So they're all just a little bit different.
And then what's the role of the province, or how's the program work to go work with someone outside those district areas? What kind of provincial dollars are involved, or what's that look like?
hold on.
She's got pages.
All right. So when it comes to irrigation support in the province, one of the things that we provide is soil certification. And so the very first step in the development process is to assess the land and make sure it is irrigable and can support irrigation. As part of that, we work with the Water Security Agency in terms of finding water for them, developing that water license. And so as a ministry, we help producers work through a 7-step program in order for them to develop that irrigation. And that program requires support across ministries, primarily with Water Security Agency, but also Ministry of Environment as well. In addition to that irrigation development support and soil certification, we also provide extension for new growers. Because we want those growers to be producing higher value crops, including things like vegetables, potatoes, fruit, and other crops under irrigation that would be more profitable. Part of that is also then in marketing those crops. We also provide support for I would call it the engineering side of the irrigation in terms of helping them determine what kind of setup they need, what kind of pivot, the pipes, things like that. And we also provide significant funding into irrigation research, and we partner with the Canadian Saskatchewan Irrigation Development Centre and Outlook. And last but not least is the irrigation programming that we provide under our CAP. The largest one is our Irrigation Development Program, and that is where we provide producers a maximum of, it's a cost share agreement where we cover 2/3 of the cost to a maximum of $13.20 per acre, and each individual is capped at $500,000. And so that's I guess a snapshot of what we do to support irrigation in the province.
No, thanks for that. And the 2/3, sort of, that's these are for the non-district works, and then the district projects. That's the sort of reflective of the 2/3 share.
It's the same share.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. No, thanks for that. So. With the growth then, and the majority is occurring right now outside of the district works that are there. So you have these other infill acres that are there. With respect to getting the other 50,000 online to get to that 85,000, is there any dollars in this budget to help to prepare those acres, or what's the budget, I guess, the financial implications of bringing those additional 50,000 acres? Of course, this is outside of the whole Diefenbaker considerations.
There's two parts to that that we're supporting that development. One is in last year's budget. In this, there's an additional $2.5 million that we are putting towards that irrigation development program that I mentioned. And so that just means that there's more money going into that program to support the increased acres that we're seeing. So that's one part of that. And the other part of that is that Water Security Agency is looking into those 6 other areas to see about their potential. And so what they're doing is in most cases, it's a consultant or an engineering firm that they're bringing on to assess the feasibility of developing those other areas. Once we know that, then the next step will be to look how we can expand in those areas as well.
Thanks for that information, and that's the work that you're doing to expand that 50,000 additional acres, is that right?
Yes,
Making
correct.
decisions as to where and what makes the most sense.
Correct, and hopefully more.
Right. And do you, are you able to share what those 6 areas are? Maybe those are public already?
The 6 smaller irrigation projects that Water Security Agency is looking into includes the Elbow Loreburn area, the the Saskatoon South, oh my God. Seuss, but what's the acronym? Hold on, Saskatoon Southeast Water Supply System, which we nicknamed the Seuss, which flows between the Broderick Reservoir and Blackstrap. The third area is looking into the Quill Lakes Basin, which also has a benefit there for, again, drainage projects. The fourth area is Thunder Creek region, which is more in the southwest. And then also number 5 is the North Saskatchewan River, the north area on Highway 16 over to North Battleford. And the 6th area is in the southeast, that Rafferty Grant Divine Reservoir area. So those are the 6, so they're across the province in different regions.
Thanks for that information. I appreciate that. Moving along a little bit, just to I asked a couple questions last year that the minister wasn't able to answer at this table around the Diefenbaker project, and then took it. I think the suggestion was to take it to different ministers, which we did. But we didn't get answers to that to some of the questions at this point. So I'll put a couple questions to the minister this year, and but it's pertinent to agriculture, right? And pertinent to being able to do a proper feasibility and proper economic assessment of the project is understanding your full costs within it. So a couple of those questions were, around what's known around costs within this program. Last year I was asking whether or not district works projects, moving water to the property line, whether that would be funded at the 2/3, in the same way that we've seen projects in the past, and whether those were included in the current estimates that were being tossed around on the project. And the answer was no, those aren't included, that it would likely be 2/3. There'd be a significant, if you're looking at the kind of scope and scale of what this project represents, it'd be a significant cost, I would think. So just looking for, if you've got the pen sharpened on some of those numbers this year around the district works piece, the 2/3, moving the water to the property line, as well any anticipation of any on-farm programs that you're looking to administer to work with producers on this front, and other aspects, the cost of things like power, which I understand last year you identified weren't included in that current estimate. So just looking for updates on the total costs that are being sketched out.
Well, once again, I'll probably give you the same answer I gave you last year. That project is obviously being led by Water Security Agency and SAS Bills, so that's probably where you'll want to direct those questions on where that's at and where the process is at.
Okay, no, I will, we'll follow up there. I know I'm cognizant of the time. I do think that, this is a project that's, has a large agricultural connect, and that's critical to the, the economic case and the assessment and the feasibility, and, to properly do that, some hard numbers are needed. Just with respect to that DEEF project, I noticed that I didn't really see references in the budget this year to it. Is there any changes with respect to your government's commitment on this front, or funding changes?
Yeah, once again, you'll have to direct those questions to Water Security Agency and their budget, because that's where the numbers would be.
Thanks again. And just to clarify on the 2/3 coverage on the like the district works, the movement of water to the property line, there's not on-farm coverage then for the pivot itself. So roughly about $150,000 or so typically for 133 acres. Is that sort of that's the farm the producer's expense exclusively? Okay. Foreign land purchase concerns and the concerns of sort of the way the deals have been structured over the last number of years. I know I'm a bit of a broken record on this front, but it's something we hear lots from landowners and rural communities, concerns and how the deals have been structured to break the spirit and intent of our laws. So one of the things I've brought about in the past is the requirement of a mandatory declaration of beneficial interest being a requirement in land purchase. Is this something that's being pursued by the government? If not, why not? And are there any other actions this government's looking to take to ensure the spirit and intent of our laws are being upheld?
Introduce yourself.
Thank you. Good evening. Paul Johnson, Assistant Deputy Minister. The answer on mandatory statutory declarations is, or the question is for the Minister of Justice. Okay, we're one user of statutory declarations. The Farmland Security Board may ask for a statutory declaration on any land transaction in the province. And we do ask for a number of statutory declarations, and we do follow up on farmland transactions that are flagged, that may be suspicious, where we have reason to concern it may not be Canadian ownership. So we continue to look at the statutory declaration process and the resources we have in the Farmland Security Board to follow up on transactions. But the issue of mandatory statutory declarations is a question for the Minister of Justice.
Okay, thank you very much. Certainly, the Farmland Security Board can play such an important role here. They need the tools, or the teeth, though, as well on this front. And it's been one of those points of frustrations where, you go chat with the legal community or the business community, and they're sort of rather well aware of how some of the deals have been structured over the last number of years that, aren't consistent with the spirit and intent of the laws. And I think at the end of the day, if you should decide either to change your laws or uphold your laws. And so it's a point of some frustration, but I sure appreciate your your response here. With respect to transportation and making sure that we have the transportation system that can get our products to market and perform for producers and exporters in the province, certainly rail is such a critical piece of that. And often that duopoly just fails to perform to the standards that producers need and expect, and I think that they deserve. Short lines, of course, play an important role within it, producer cars as well, and I know there's conversations with respect to the current Canadian Grain Act review with some aspects of this around producer cars and whatnot. But I'm interested in just hearing what undertakings you and your government have taken on with the federal government and locally as well to ensure our rail system is performing for producers.
Well, it's too bad we're ending because I thought I could have gone for an hour on this one too. Are you ready to go for an hour? Let's do it. Yeah, no. I think the committee's ready to. Yeah, no, obviously rail transportation has been near and dear to my heart for years, being on short lines for as long as I was, and the whole transportation, and talking to both CP and CN, and I think you saw that. Even with our government, when we had the labor disruption with CP, where our government asked that the federal government deem the two railways an essential service. And I think that's an important thing to recognize. But we get weekly updates from both CN and CP on grain movement and what happens there. We also are always in discussion with the Western Grain Elevators Association on service delivery and where things are at with them. So, but I think a couple of things that I do want to talk about, and I think it's important to go on record that our government has been very vocal on changing the structure of the Vancouver Port Authority on the board of directors, where we think that the provinces should have at least 2 seats on that board, and both all of Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, and BC. So we just don't feel that one representative from the prairies is significant to make sure that all transportation to Vancouver, and it's not just grain, it's lumber, it's potash, it's all aspects of it, that it really move in a very timely fashion, because we are a trading nation. A lot of times our credibility is on the line as a trading partner for logistics and service delivery of products. We've heard it from our customers globally as well. So we, and that's why we felt it was important as a government to deem the railways as an essential service, and we will continue to advocate for that as well. So we do everything we possibly can on the rail service side, and for the most part in having good, frank discussions with the railways as well. So that's my answer to that one. I could have went longer, but I'll shut it off.
Thank you, Minister. So having reached our agreed upon time for consideration of these estimates, we will adjourn consideration of the estimates for the Ministry of Agriculture. Minister, if you have any thank yous and wrap-ups you want to make.
I do. Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to thank you and the committee members and the opposition for the questions today in a very cordial and respectful manner. Thank you for that as well. So, but I do want to go on record for thanking this team, Madam Chair. I am privileged to have a team of dedicated folks, and I know they're sitting behind me, but to me, they're always sitting beside me, and in discussions that we have at a federal level or interprovincial level as well. And their dedication to the ag sector here in this province is second to none. And I also know and see it at a federal level when I bring these folks to the table, the respect they have nationally from their peers as well means a lot, not only to me, but to this province and to the ag industry as a whole. So this job is pretty easy for me with a team like this behind me. So I want to thank them, Madam Chair. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. Mr. Weatherspoon, if you have any wrap-up comments?
You bet. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks to committee members. Thanks to the Minister. And thank you to all those officials that are here tonight and all those that are involved in the work that we're discussing here today. I know there's so many others, so many other civil servants and so many others, across agriculture in our province that have been involved in this work, producer organizations and all those involved in science and research and innovation, all those involved in agribusiness and commerce and trade. So thank you very much. And I think the Minister identifies a proud reputation this province has, more specifically to the team I'm looking at and the civil service that's involved in agriculture. Without a doubt, you are incredibly well respected, both in this province and across this country. You bring a lot of clout for agriculture in this province. So to that team of civil servants who are involved in this work, thank you so very much.
All right, we have one more item on our agenda for this evening, so we will now begin consideration of Bill number 73, the Animal Production Act, Clause 1, short title. Minister, do you have to change any officials out?
No, but Madam Chair, could I ask for just a 5-minute recess?
Yes.
Thank you.
It does.
Okay.
Welcome back, folks. We will now begin consideration of Bill number 73, the Animal Production Act, Clause 1, one short title. Minister, do you have any opening remarks?
Yes, I do. Thank you so much, Madam Chair, and thank you, committee members, for your patience. Obviously, I'm pleased to talk to you this evening about the Animal Production Act 2021. This replaces 4 outdated pieces of legislation: the Animal Identification Act, the Animal Products Act, the Line Fence Act, and the Stray Animals Act. This current legislation framework for livestock production had not received a full review since the 1970s. The practices and technology used by producers is vastly improved, and day-to-day operations look different than they did in the 70s. Our legislation needs to reflect the realities of livestock production today and into the future. To achieve this, the Animal Production Act will bring together government oversight of livestock production in Saskatchewan. The ministry first proposed this idea to stakeholders in February of 2020. The idea received a very favorable response from the industry. The changes encompassed in the Act are largely administrative in nature and cover livestock and animal product inspections and related licenses, rules for administrative agreements the province has with service providers to conduct inspections, authority for the handling of stray animals and animal liens, fencing cost sharing rules and an arbitration process for settling disputes, and the ability for animal groups to create assurance funds for their industries. To date, stakeholders have been supportive of this approach and have little to no concerns with this direction. Due to the administrative nature of the Act, no major impacts to the province's livestock producers or service providers are anticipated. There are 11 regulations under the existing acts. Some are very interrelated and can be combined to streamline future updates and efficient use by the public. Our intent is to create fewer, more relevant regulations. Ultimately, we will simplify the legislation to paint a clear picture of what is required of Saskatchewan's livestock producers. Key issues our stakeholders want to discuss are included in the regulations. Of particular interest are the processes and forms related to the handling of stray animals and fencing standards, livestock sales and inspections. The ministry is already engaging with stakeholders to further discuss these matters and bring forward regulations in 2022. It is anticipated that the new Act and regulations could come into force as early as January 1st, 2023, and having current legislation is an important part of supporting any sector. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Minister, and I'll open the floor to questions from committee members. I'll recognize Mr. Weatherspoon.
Thanks, Minister, for the remarks, and to those involved in this work. Just looking to get an understanding of who was engaged as stakeholders, who was consulted on this front, and making sure as well that I have a full understanding of the minister said there was little to no problems that were being identified by stakeholders. Maybe just make sure to identify where there might be, if there are any problems with this legislation, to make sure that those are identified and to make sure we're fully canvassing the livestock producers and their respective organizations.
I'm done.
Paul Johnson, Assistant Deputy Minister. I'm not sure if I have to redo that, but the consultations have been and will be extensive. We've already talked to all of the major livestock organizations in Saskatchewan. I can go through the list if you'd like. It's the Saskatchewan Cattlemen's Association, the Saskatchewan Cattle Feeders Association, the Canadian Cattle Identification Agency, the Saskatchewan Stock Growers Association, Animal Protection Services of Saskatchewan, Canadian Llama and Alpaca Association, Chicken Farmers of Saskatchewan, Sask Milk, Sask Bison Association, Sask Cervid Alliance, Sask Egg Producers, Sask Goat Breeders Association, Sask Horse Federation, Sask Livestock Association, Sask Pork Development Board, Sask Sheep Breeders Association, Saskatchewan Sheep Development Board, Saskatchewan Turkey Producers Marketing Board, Agriculture Agri-Food Canada, Agriculture Producers Association of Saskatchewan, Canadian Food Inspection Agency, Livestock Marketers of Saskatchewan, Livestock Services of Saskatchewan, Saskatchewan Association of Rural Municipalities, Saskatchewan Food Industry Development Centre, Saskatchewan Inspected Meat Plants, Saskatchewan Meat Processors Association, Sask Ministry of Health, and Saskatchewan Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. So it's a pretty comprehensive list of those we have engaged with and will continue to engage with as we develop regulations.
Thanks so much. And just to be clear, as far as concerns that have been identified by stakeholders through that consultation, are there any outstanding concerns that haven't been addressed with this legislation?
As the minister said, the legislation is largely administrative and enabling. So we expect to have detailed discussions with stakeholders on regulations once we get to the regulation stage of phase of this new act. So we know some issues will come forward in terms of stray animals and how we manage stray animals. There may be some concerns arising on fencing and other aspects of it. We know the livestock dealers have wanted to have a conversation on surety bond levels for many years. So a number of issues have risen towards the surface of this conversation, but we'll have those detailed discussions once we get to the regulations.
And all of the concerns that are being identified by stakeholders can be addressed effectively and resolved through regulations?
Yes.
Yep. Okay. I just want to say thanks to all those that have been involved in this work, and I would also just suggest to any of those folks that might be following this, if their hopefully their work either concerns are resolved through this process, but if for some reason that's not moving forward in the way that they feel is important as the official opposition, we're always a phone call away as well to make sure we're learn more and that we'll be constructive through the process. So no, thank you very much. I heard pretty wide canvas of the different sectors there as well, so thanks for that consultation.
All right. Seeing that there are no further questions, we will move to vote off the clauses. Clause 1, short title, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. 1-1, sorry. Clause 1-2, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 1-3, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 1-4, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 2-1, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 2-2, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 3-1, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 3-2, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 3-3, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4-1, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4-2, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4-3, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4-4, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4-5, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4-6, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4-7, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4-8, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4-9, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4-10, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4-11, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4-12, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4-13, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4-14, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4-15, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 5-1, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 5-2, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 5-3, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 5-4, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 5-5, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 5-6, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 5-7, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 5-8, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 5-9, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 5-10, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 5-11, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 6-1, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 6-2, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 6-3, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 6-4, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 7-1, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 7-2, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 7-3, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 7-4, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 7-5, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 7-6, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 7-7, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 7-8, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 7-9, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 7-10, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 8-1, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 8.2, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 9.1, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 9.2, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 9.3, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 9.4, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 10.1, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 10.2, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 10.3, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 10.4, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 11.1, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 11.2, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 11.3, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 11.4, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 12.1, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 13.1, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 13.2, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 13.3, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 13.4, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 13.5, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 13.6, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 13.7, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 13.8, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 13.9, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 13.10, is that agreed? Clause 13.11, coming into force, is that agreed? Carried. Her Majesty, by and with the advice and consent of the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan, enacts as follows: the Animal Production Act.
That's good, but here's the Her Majesty.
I would ask a member to move that we report Bill number 73, the Animal Production Act, without amendment. Mr. Lemaitre so moves. Is that agreed? Carried. Minister, closing remarks.
Time to go home. Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Madam Chair. You did a great job, and to my colleague from the opposite side of the Assembly, thank you very much for your respect of the ethics. I appreciate it, and thanks to the committee members. Thank you.
This concludes our business for this evening. I would ask a member to move a motion of adjournment. Mr. Francis so moves. All agreed? Carried. This committee stands adjourned until Wednesday, April the 6th at 2022 at 6:00 p.m.